Hi everyone. So I've just finished the Metamorphosis. It's a masterpiece. This is the fourth time I've read it, I believe. Probably the most pertinent reading, or potent reading, I've yet experienced. Metamorphosis was published in 1915. Kafka specifically told the publishers, the publishing house, not to include a single illustration. He forbade any illustration of the monstrous vermin that Gregor Samsa turns into. The reason being that, well, as many believe, is that Kafka wanted to keep this sense of vagueness, and almost dissonance to the story. You can never tell whether he actually has turned into a monster. I mean, it specifically says that he's crawling around the rooms and the walls and the floor and stuff, but like, I'm sure I've explained the way I've been feeling as, crawling up the walls. I'm lying in bed and looking around me and projecting myself into action instead of doing it. That was an offside. Let's go straight to the beginning. So it begins with Gregor Samsa waking up one morning. He's a traveling cloth salesman, and his family, that is his mother, his father, and his sister, rely on him for his income to keep their financial stability afloat. His boss comes a-knocking, and Gregor scares the hell out of all of them, and in the process loses his job by attempting to open the door, looking the way that he does. His father hates the monster he's become and immediately treats him with reproach. His mother doesn't seem to is more aligned with the father, but nonetheless she doesn't really do anything to help him or to assist his monstrous transformation. And then you've got his little sister called Greta, who still loves her brother and tries to care for him, brings him food. When she sees that he's crawling around the place, she removes some of the furniture. The fact that he feels like a bug at the prospect of going to work, that his life is almost insect-like, which mirrors Kafka's reservations towards working in a was it a solicitor's office, I believe it was. So I'm trying to be quite esoteric with my approach towards the Metamorphosis because there's so much information out there regarding it. But there is one point I want to raise, but it's the question of the Metamorphosis. Who's changing? Is it Gregor? I mean, yes, he is, but like, could it be his little sister who is the one experiencing the metamorphosis? At the beginning of the book, she's quite meek. Throughout the process of the story, she takes on a lot of the responsibilities Gregor once had. I believe she even becomes a cloth salesman. She starts learning an instrument. She helps her family with the tenants, and then towards the end, literally the last line of the Metamorphosis, and it was like a confirmation of their new dreams and excellent intentions, that at the end of their journey, their daughter sprang to her feet first and stretched her young body. Depending on your translation, she may stretch her life back, she may look more youthful, and I don't know, a lot of translations differ on that last sentence, but the point still stands that Greta comes out of it feeling good. The family move on, and Greta, and they go to a smaller apartment, they can afford the rent, and they get back on their feet, and his little sister literally gets back on her feet in the very last line and is anew, I suppose. There's a lot of violence towards Gregor, there's a lot of meanness. People are quick to point at the father, and the father is probably the most outwardly obvious example of disdain towards Gregor. But there's also a bit of speculation among scholars in the past 15 years or so, and I'm of this opinion as well, that Greta is perhaps the driving negativity in Gregor's life in the Metamorphosis. At the very beginning, his mum and dad are like, nope, we're done, we're not having an insect for a son, they leave him. The only thing that seems to keep Gregor alive is the love, warmth, and compassion that his little sister seems to provide for him, and he comes to rely on her for this. There's the mum, as I said, isn't a very vocal figurehead in this book, and if you want to look at it from a feminist angle, it's very interesting how all of the work and the responsibility and the caring and all of the compassion is all frosted on this little girl's shoulders. I don't know how old she is exactly, actually, but Greta is given the bulk of the responsibility, and the mum is given no voice, which is just interesting to think. If Greta at the very beginning had just, left her brother like their parents did, would he have died sooner? Would he have ended his own life in the first couple of pages? Perhaps he would have found the resolve to keep himself alive and be alive way past the book, maybe crawled out the window. We don't know this, obviously. This is all speculation, but it feels to me that the book explicitly tells you that Greta is essentially keeping Gregor alive or sane to the best of her ability. You could say Greta's the worst influence on Gregor's life in this book. You could say that. Yeah, this is a fascinating book. You could literally read it 20 times in a row and get 20 different interpretations of the text. It's as bizarre as it is a masterpiece. It's absurd, yet so horribly relatable. It's absolutely fascinating, a book to read, a short story to read. So that's the Metamorphosis. That was, obviously I didn't go over all of it. The reason being it's his most celebrated work. You owe yourself to read it anyway, and if not, there are hundreds of videos and articles and essays analysing this story in particular. And now we're on to A Country Doctor. Hi, so I've just read A Country Doctor, which is the titular tale of the short story collection A Country Doctor, published in 1917. It's absurd and also, like all of the works I've discussed, pretty damn brilliant. Before we get into that, I do want to make two asides. One, there is a anime by Koji Yamamura. He does a lot of absurd, very artistic short anime films, like film festival features, and he actually adapted A Country Doctor, and it's horribly reviewed on my anime list. However, I think it's brilliant. It perfectly captures the environment, the tone, the vibe, everything about it. It is a brilliant adaptation. I definitely recommend you watch it. It's free on YouTube, so check that out. It's called Inaka Isha, I think, and it's really good. So check that out. The other side would be that I actually discovered just before reading it that there was a psychological paper published in 2009, testing whether reading absurdist works and trying to make sense of absurdist works before given learning exercises could increase cognitive aptitude and ability to detect patterns in their environment and the subject matter. And it actually did, hang on, let me just look at this. The findings summarise that when people have to work to find consistency and meaning in a fragmented story, it increases the cognitive mechanisms responsible for implicitly learning statistical regularities. So that's really interesting. I'm going to do further research into that later, because I had no idea a Franz Kafka work had been used in a official psychological report. So with that out of the way, let's get into the story itself. Now, A Country Doctor follows a doctor who one wintry, cold, freezing, blistering cold, dark night finds that because his horse had died the night before and he is in need to visit a patient 10 miles away, he discovers that there's no horse available. So his maid, Rosa, attempts to go and find one for him. They can't find a horse, but they do stumble upon this door which leads to a stable, and he's about to kick the door in before Rosa opens it, and they find horses inside. However, there's a man called the groom. Seems like a very unusual fellow. He lends the horse gracefully to the doctor, and then physically assaults Rosa by biting her twice on the cheek. Rosa goes to the doctor to complain. The doctor is then about to scold the groom before realizing that he is in the groom's debt, and quickly rushes off. And as he's about to leave, he realizes Rosa's fleeing into the house and the groom is following, and the groom wants Rosa as payment, it seems.
the Doctor in a heartbeat, and this is probably the first huge elements, one of the first huge elements of absurdism in this short story. The Doctor, in a moment, in a second, is at the patient's house. He feels a flurry of snow. This is perfectly represented in that anime I was discussing earlier, so I definitely recommend, if you're not going to read it, go and watch that. So he appears at the patient's doorstep, goes inside and finds a family and the patient. At first guess, he assumes that the patient's going to be okay, and he's fine. He doesn't seem too ill. He is about to take leave when he sees that the patient's sister, I believe, is holding a rag covered in blood. And when the Doctor observes the patient further, he sees a huge, disgustingly written wound on the side of the patient's body, festering, and a clear indication that the man's likely going to die. However, through all of this, despite the fact that he's obviously got a near-death patient right in front of him, he can't stop thinking about Rosa. He can't stop thinking about what he's just left behind and the fate and state of his maid, whose relationship isn't made completely clear, but that's fine. Suddenly, the absurdism takes new heights when the horses stick their head in through the window and they're all looking around, and the whole atmosphere of the room takes on this very specific tone, this very dreamlike, nightmare-like experience. The Doctor is disrobed, made naked, has his fur coat and bag taken from him, and is laid down in the bed with the patient. And the Doctor ends up, I think, realising that he can't help, and he gets out of bed, throws on all of his clothes, jumps on his horse, and makes to go home. And he expects to be back as quick as he got here. However, what is awaiting him is a 10-mile trek through the snow without his coat, and that's kind of where it ends. So, two words that keep jumping back to me are occupation and preoccupation. The Doctor is only given that name. He is known primarily by his job title and his responsibility and the perceived responsibility of the people in the village and his patient and himself. Despite this, he doesn't carry himself like a doctor, and he doesn't really seem in service of the person that he's treating. And I feel like the patient does pick up on that a bit. What's interesting is when you think of a doctor's job responsibility, they go door to door or stay at home, but in this case door to door for no reason other than to make the person better and money, but assisting others even if you yourself are put into trouble. I'm reading this during the COVID-19 situation where workers and the responsibility thrust upon them by themselves and the people around them. He is even thrown into bed. He has even made bedfellows with this clearly sick, festering man, and made to feel bad for not helping him. I just want to say that based on the depiction of the patient, he's a lost cause. And I think he was a lost cause before the doctor got there. He already wanted to die. He doesn't seem to have any will in him. He may not have had any before the wound. I believe he got it from an axe. I can't recall precisely, but I think he got it from an axe. It hasn't been cleaned properly, and it's got worms in it. He is seemingly waiting to just die. And I think the doctor knows this, and that's why he doesn't give it his full attention, and why he almost uses empty words. And when he's made bedfellows with the patient, he sits there and takes all the flack thrown at him, essentially. This bit in particular jumps out at me. I have very little confidence in you. Why, you were only blown in here. You didn't come on your own feet. Instead of helping me, you're cramping me on my deathbed. What I'd like best is to scratch your eyes out. Right, I said. It is a shame, and yet I am a doctor. What am I to do? Believe me, it is not too easy for me either. Am I supposed to be content with this apology? Oh, I must be. I can't help it. I always have to put up with things. A fine wound is all I brought into the world. That was my sole endowment. Yeah. It almost feels quite malicious. them calling the doctor down, especially, and we'll get to the preoccupation aspect in a minute, but especially considering the Rose and Groom scenario that we're witnessing earlier, it almost feels like a waste of time, a waste of his time. And there's an absurd scene where choir children come in and start singing, basically criticizing him further for not doing his job, for not being good enough. I can't help but feel like this is some sort of metaphor for the responsibility of being a doctor or someone a key service worker in particular, for the guilt, the inner guilt and turmoil a doctor might feel towards their patient. And I think we'll segue from that into the preoccupation aspect. Now, while he's there, one of the main reasons he doesn't give the patient his full attention is because of the situation with Rose and Groom at the beginning. This could be a quite lateral and snapshot-y representation of, a doctor's personal life and the way the darkest, gloomiest, depressing, most anxiety-inducing things could be happening at home, but you have to go to work, and you have to make it to work on time. You have to get there promptly, no matter what, even if you get indebted and end up effectively selling your maid. I don't have any answers for you. I really don't. A Country Doctor is a weird piece of literature, and I sat here racking my brains for about an hour now, and I think I'll need to read it a couple more times, watch the anime a couple more times, and I think I might get it, but as it is, it's probably one of the most confusing stories by Franz Kafka, and that's never a bad thing. So, still, as I will say with all of these stories, more or less, read it, because each story will tell you something, and you might not even know what it is.